informed. Nova Scotians, when is the best time for you to visit Nova Scotia?
Now.
It's very good right now.
Yeah.
But I haven't been here in a long
Depends
time.
if you like heat though. If you like heat, July. Beautiful trees
It's
now.
supposed to be like October 12th.
October.
So if we come on October 12th.
They told me that's when the leaves are supposed to change.
Is it?
That's the best time.
The
Yeah.
best time because you get
Pretty tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, we were just saying it's a good temperature to hold the court.
Yeah.
Not too hot, not too cool. It's just,
Best time is whenever you can make it.
And when you all can as well.
Yeah. People were commenting it's the first time they've seen me in shoes.
And a haircut.
It's unusual for me to see you.
How do they feel?
Really good. I bought them for the trip. What happened was Mary and I were just doing some shopping before the trip for some clothes and stuff. I needed some pants because I knew it was going to be a bit cooler on the trip. And so, because I don't have pants either. Trousers, I should say. So I had to buy some. And it just so happened I was walking past this shop and I saw these shoes that looked really comfortable. So I said to Mary, I probably need some shoes for the trip too.
But the only thing is I noticed that because of the soles, they actually squeak a bit when you're standing there. When you're working.
Oh, we're not just. Yeah, but it's I do wear shoes at home sometimes. You know, when we're doing work outside or whatever, I've got some safety boots for that and stuff. Yeah, but it is unusual to wear shoes all the time. In Australia, we don't really have to much, except when we're working. Yeah. All right. So how did you feel about that discussion so far? Good? Yeah. What we want to do now is sort of get into the nitty-gritties a little bit, right? We want to sort of drill down into some practical things like, and just see, there's a number of things we'd like to see in the practical application of these things. One is the relationship between a physical issue and emotional and spiritual and sexual problems. You know, we want to see the relationship between these things. And we also want to see, and remember this discussion is really about the effect of the sin on the insincerity of the longing. So we want to see how there are some physical things that we do that actually do affect the insincerity of your longing with regard to spiritual things. And then there's some sexual things we do that also cause the insincerity to occur, and so forth. So we want to have a look at this hierarchy. And Mary doesn't like it that way around. So she likes it. She wants it to be like
dotted. Do a dotted other one.
She would like it to see it this way around.
Yeah.
Like a triangle in the opposite direction, in other words. But what we would like to see is how the principles sort of play out in different aspects of our life. And the easiest ones to start with are
physical.
Aren't they? Makes sense, doesn't it? Because the physical things you can generally see, you can see the effects of them. You don't have to measure them emotionally or spiritually. You can just sort of see them playing out physical life. We have the reason why the earth is so bound to the physical part of it is because the physical ties in with all your senses. Your sense of sight, your sense of hearing, your sense of taste, smell, touch. All of those senses are where you experience a lot of the physical life. Now, of course, you can see, too, that the senses do hook into the sexual senses that you have. and also the emotional senses that you have. So, you know, if you see a beautiful view in front of you, what do you often feel? Like you sit down in front of a beautiful view, look at the beautiful view, sometimes you'll feel this sort of sense of peace come over you. So that's an example of a physical thing triggering an emotional response. Right? So there's good reason that God created all your senses so that you could have an experience that then could feed into the emotional side of your life. Because it's the emotional side of your life where really you experience a lot of your life. And of course, when you're also connected to things spiritually in a true sense, it's the spiritual side of life that affects a lot of your life as well, which is something that not a lot of people on earth experience much of, unfortunately. But obviously in the celestial heavens, it's a primary part of the joy that you experience in life. So what we would like to do, I'm just thinking about what to rub off. I might rub this side off because I might want to refer to the other side quite a lot. So let's rub this off. So let's start with some physical things, shall we? Try some precious physical things that you like. What can I take away from you?
No one has mentioned the toilet paper.
No one's mentioned toilet paper.
The whole big talk happened and nobody said a word. Only one person. It's come up a bit.
Pets.
Bidets.
Let's look at pets. Okay. Big thing in the world nowadays, isn't it? You almost see everybody, you go walking down the beach, dogs walking out, cats everywhere, yeah, pets.
At the top of the glacier in Austria,
Pets.
Dogs coming up on the
They
chair.
took their dogs up the chairlift.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not joking. There were lots of dogs up on the top of the glacier. We went to this glacier. By the way, the glacier is not like, you know, we're used to seeing glaciers like in New Zealand that are like 20, 30 kilometres long, but this one was like, it shrunk down to it's only like 500 metres long now or something like that. But even so, still all these pets going up the top of the glacier. Yeah, pets. Okay. What's wrong with pets? Man, it's going to be interesting next time the media gets hold of this. Okay. So if we look at it from the perspective of love, so now what we're trying to do is examine the principles from a top-down perspective about a physical thing we do. Does that make sense to you? Because if you can sort of examine it from a top-down perspective, you can eventually see whether the thing that you're doing physically is in harmony or out of harmony with love. Now, of course, if we could hear God with regard to the conscience, we wouldn't need much analysing, would we? We would be able to go, what does God feel about pets? Oh, yeah. I won't tell you his answer, right? Because what does he feel? Let's first ask the conscience. So the very first, you could say the very first thing you need to do with regard in solving any problem you face in your life is to first ask God via the conscience. Right? The reason why is that's going to be the most accurate source of information with a few caveats, if we can say. The caveats being if you're not emotionally sensitive or you don't want to know the truth, then of course you're not going to hear anything via the conscience, right? But other than that, if God can tell you directly, then you don't really need to do anything else, do you? You go, no, the answer is no, or the answer is yes. Then you could start asking why, if you really wanted to delve more deeply into something. But via the conscience is the best thing to do, isn't it, first? So that's... Right. Is there any circumstance from God's perspective where you should have a pet? So you ask God, How many people got yes? How many people got no? How many people got I didn't get anything? Right. So if you ask the conscience, you can see the problem with asking the conscience is if your conscience is not developed clearly, then the answers are, and there's all sorts of reasons why it might not be. And Mary and I did some presentations some time ago about the conscience, didn't we, when we were talking about Forgiveness and Repentance series of talks that we gave. I think it was done in the studio, so it'll be online, I think from 2017 or 18 or thereabouts, something like that. We talked about the conscience and how it works and what limits its effectiveness. And so it's important to understand the conscience, so I'd recommend, if you haven't seen those particular videos, have a look at them. But one of the major issues with the conscience is that if I am not sensitive, or I don't really want to know the truth in a sincere manner, because remember, we said back here, here on this page it was, we said that sin affects our sincerity. So the more sin I'm in, the less sincere I am to find the truth about a matter, because I want to continue my sin. Right? So if I really want to have a pet, and that's my feeling, I really need to have a pet. So let's say maybe I live alone and I've had a pet for 10 years and I don't have much other company and all of that kind of stuff, then my desire for a pet might be very high. So I really want to have a pet. So when I have a pet, I feel like, oh, I've got company. A lot of times people treat their pet as another human that they don't have to really have any disagreement with, right? So it's a very easy relationship, right? You don't really have to worry about a relationship much. You've got your pet and he does whatever you want, basically. So for a lot of people, that's very attractive. Like they've had relationships in their life and they've found them all to be, hard, difficult. It's really quite difficult, isn't it? Coming together with another person who has a different thoughts than you, different feelings than you, different history. And a lot of people get to a certain age and go, I'm over that. A pet's a solution to that. And so if I'm in that state emotionally, can you see, I'm already going to have a lot of resistance to hearing a no answer, aren't I, from God? So a yes or a maybe is my preferred. And so straight away I'm not really sincere, because if God's answer is no, I'm not going to hear it, because I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear the no. Right? And so this is the trouble with the conscience, is if my desire is that I don't want to know the answer, or an answer that's positive or negative is going to affect me emotionally in some way, then of course I'm not really sincere about finding the answer. Right? And so that's the issue with the conscience. If the conscience isn't working, then what other mechanisms do I have available to me as an individual to find out about whether it's right or not? The only real other mechanism is my logical mind, isn't it, in a way? Can you see that? I would have to determine it from a logical perspective about what I currently understand love to be. So perhaps what we need to do first when we look at the pets issue, we look at, right, what does it mean to love an animal? What do you think it means? You give me some ideas. If we use the mics.
Well, first,
Well, is it? I might have muted it. Sorry, let's just say those. Might pay. Give me that one soon. Just check that. Yes.
Well, first I would let them free. Let them do their things. Yeah.
So part of loving something is to give it freedom, isn't it? All right. Yes. So that's very good. What else?
Lots of treats.
Is that loving something? To give it lots of treats? Can you see it's not, if the treats are not healthy, then you could actually decay its life sooner than it would necessarily be. So you can see, if you look at love, the treats issue is not love. All right?
When I give myself lots of treats, I'm not really loving.
No. So because if you lived on treats, you can see you'd probably, what did they do, that experiment where they had McDonald's for 30 days and got very, very sick as a result, right? You can see if you don't have a good diet, and the same goes with animals. Obviously, if they don't have a well-balanced, rounded diet, then obviously their body is going to have diseases develop, and their body is also going to have sort of all sorts of conditions that begin, and none of those things are going to be good for the animal. So giving the animal treats is not a loving act, right? Yep. Yep.
Just behind Andrew.
Yep. Behind. Yep. Yep. And then.
Not having demands or expectations.
Sorry, is it?
Like love of the animal would require that we don't have demands or expectations of them.
That's right. So in other words, if the animal's got a role, so you can see love says there's no role. It's allowed to be what it's meant to be, isn't it? So love allowed. So an example of that is if you're married and you forced your wife in the role of cooking for you every day, that's not love. Right? And it's the same if you force the dog or a cat or into a role where it's got to be with you all the time, inside all the time, where you can pet it and all of these kind of things. Well, that's not love either. Right? So obviously there'd be love is no role, right? And the opposite of that obviously is give them a role, and that's what they have to fulfill. That's sort of the opposite of love, isn't it? Yeah. What else? You come up to back. So, yeah. You're just first here and then back.
Learning about the animal's nature.
Okay, so love is trying to understand the thing, isn't it? Trying to bring some understanding to how is this animal being designed, how is it being designed to live, and also when it comes to things like dogs and cats, really humans to a large extent designed them, didn't they? Mm-hmm. Like if you look at the breeds of these animals now, they've been bred for hundreds of years, and some, like cats, thousands of years, into a certain type of animal, which is far removed from its original design. So that's the other thing you've got to understand, is that how much of humans modified the design to suit the human, right? So love would say, what was the intention of its original design, wouldn't it? And then the unloving thing is, I want to force it to be what I want it to look like, right? Which is modifying the original design to suit myself, right? Now you can see that any time I modify a design of a living thing to suit myself, that's a fairly unloving thing to do. If I allow it to be its original design, whatever that was, then obviously now I'm being more loving and considerate. So it's a lot about like bringing some understanding. I want to understand everything about the animal, like what its nature is, what it was designed to do, why was it designed to do that, what was its purpose, what was the original intention that God had for that creature, would be a good question to ask, wouldn't it? And we were Ed and Ellie and then Anna. So Anna first.
And just behind you, if you just pass it
Behind
straight
Anna first.
So the principles of equality, not putting its life above other animals and even above humans.
Well, this is very important, isn't it? Yes. So part of love is that if there's two animals, they are equal they should be equal in my expression of love towards them. So a squirrel should be equal in my expression of love as a dog. Now, when my dog is chasing the squirrel up the tree and I'm laughing about it, can you see I've got an issue where those two things are now not equal, right? So there's the principle of equality in terms of with other animals of the same type. So if there's a mammal versus mammal, insect versus insect. Of course, mammals are more important than insects in God's. You can see that quite clearly in nature that is the case, and so you can see quite clearly that insects have a role, but like obviously bigger mammals have a different kind of a role, right? But then there's also the relationship, as you point out, between human and the animal. So if I view my animal as more important than another human, can you see now I've got my whole world out of kilter, haven't I? Because from God's perspective, the animal doesn't have a soul, right? The animal has a spirit body and a physical body if it's a mammal, but not a soul. And if I'm putting the soul of a person, one of God's children, which is God's primary direct creation as well, the highest of God's creations, above the animal, then below the animal, then basically I'm saying, I think animals are more important than people. And by the way, a lot of pet owners feel this way. Animals are more important than people, and so what happens to my animal is more important than what happens to a person. And we see this playing out in many ways, don't we? Like, for example, there's many things where you can see examples of an animal gets an injury and we give it $10,000 or $15,000 worth of treatment because it's more important to me than the guy down the road, my neighbour, who had a broken leg. You know? We don't give him $10,000 or $15,000 for his treatment, but we give it to our animal. Right? So there's a very severe imbalance in the way in which we're seeing things now. So you could say there is a hierarchy of importance with regard to love. And that hierarchy of importance is humans, being the pinnacle of God's creation, have to be loved first. And then the lower creations of God would be loved next. Right? Now, the two loves are not exclusive. In other words, if you love a person, it doesn't mean you can't love animals. Right? But you can see if there was a time when you had to show some deference to one above the other, then it should be to the human rather than the animal. So in other words, there's an accident, an animal's injured and a human's injured. Who do you care for first? Well, you have to care for the human first. That would be a part of that hierarchy, not for the animal first. Right? So somebody runs over my dog. In the process of swerving to miss the dog, they hit a telephone pole. I run over and look at what you did to my dog. Instead of running over him saying, you're okay, These are the kinds of things that we do if we've got things out of kilter, right? Of love, right? Okay. Now, can you see straight away how is it with pets now that we consider these things? Now, all we've used here is a little bit of logic. We haven't even asked God at this point. But you can see, can't you, where God might be leaning with the answer? Can't you? Given the fact that there are so many considerations that I haven't considered in having a pet. Now, this one of equality is very interesting. In Australia, it's a well-known fact that the average cat in Australia kills around about 190 other animals every year. And this is a pet cat, not a wild one, a pet one. So in other words, it has enough food to eat, but it goes around killing all these animals, even not for the purpose of food. And everybody says it's because of their nature. That's what cats do. And it's actually not because of their nature. It's because emotions in humans have placed the cat, the pet, above all other animals. And so the cat feels that. It knows it's above all other animals. So what does it do? It's going to treat all other animals as lesser than itself. Right? And it does it unknowingly, but because of the human saying that pet is more important than all the other animals, the cat then acts like it is. Right? This is an example of laws being broken without being knowing, really. But if you just balance that out, me keeping my cat, every year I keep my cat, I am killing 190 other animals in preference to me keeping my cat. The cat in Australia is not even a native creature. It wasn't there in the beginning. It was imported by English into Australia. And so it wasn't even there originally. And yet this imported creature is killing and destroying most and decimating most of the natural environment when it comes to animals. Now, if I'm the person owning that cat, can you see, if I had any feeling of equality between the cat and other animals, I would at least be having a problem with that, wouldn't I? Can you see that? I would at least, if I was sensitive emotionally, I would at least be going, wow, like me keeping my cat every year is destroying another 190 animals. It's actually 186, I think it is, or something, the figure is, but close enough. And if I knew that every year I kept my cat alive until it dies, so that over the cat's lifetime, let's say the cat lives 10 years, that's nearly 2,000 other animals that have had to die for my cat. Now, you can already see that our natural environment, same here really, it looks pretty, but it's actually very decimated, isn't it? Because logging's gone on for so many years now, this constant recurring logging that happens. In Australia it's very similar, but there we don't log much because we don't have the rainfall you have. But every time you destroy a native environment, it takes hundreds of years to recover it. And when I say recover it, I mean all the animals recover in it. So there's no chance with forestry and other operations like that for the native environment to recover. So what you end up doing is that you end up decimating species. And this is what's happened in the last 100 or 200 years or so, 300 years or so, in many newly conquered nations or newly, new nations, colonised nations, of which Canada is one, right? Us in Australia, another. So we have these colonised nations that are now destroying their environment so rapidly that mass extinctions are occurring. Now, if we cared about all of that, it would be very hard to keep a pet if we actually had a sense of love for all of that happening. Because the pet contributes to that destruction of the natural environment. Of course, humans are the people who contribute to it the most, not the pet. The pet is an innocent, you could say, bystander in a way to the human emotion. Innocent party.
It's reflecting the emotional condition and trying to fulfil a role that's been given to it by
a human. Yeah, that's what it's doing. Yeah. Okay, so let's come here to Pam. There's one right next to you, Pam.
But we have pets, and so what's been on my heart
what do I do?
Is, well, I've never owned a pet as an adult, but I've actually been thinking about rescuing a dog in a pound.
Yeah. How about rescuing the thousands of animals that are like in nature? Do we have the same feeling? Mm-hmm. You see, the average person goes, I want to rescue the dog because the dog's in bad condition. But what about all the animals in nature that are in bad condition, of which there's millions? Do we have the same feeling to them? Makes sense? There's a lot of us think we have the same feeling, but we don't, because our actions demonstrate we'd rather rescue the dog than rescue them. This is where we've got to get honest with ourselves, right? Now, what I'm going to say is going to get even more confronting as we talk about it. Because you can see straight away that by my desire to have compassion for a certain type of animal over having compassion for all these other animals, can you see that's now created inequality in my desire, which is not loving what we've established logically as loving. Right? So now remember, we're having this discussion because it was indeterminate or undetermined about what God's response was. If we knew what God's response was, we wouldn't even have to have this discussion, would we? We'd know straight away yes or no. Bang, done. Right? And if I had a pet and God's response was no, then It's going to be on me what I'm going to have to do about that. What do I do? What's God's response to that? That would be interesting to find out the response. What does God feel about your sin? Is it your fault or his?
Mine.
Right, your sin is your own cause, right? So when it comes to your sin, who has to fix it?
I do.
I do. So if my sin is that I've got a pet, who's going to have to fix that? Me. How am I going to fix it? Good question, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's an answer coming up, isn't there? That a lot of you don't want to hear, right? How do I fix it? How do I stop this inequality I have between the animals, how I'm treating different types of animals? How do I stop that inequality?
Change your belief.
So let's not yell out if we can, Mike, because otherwise, yep.
Yeah, I feel a bit concerned because that's like really accurate to what I'm living. Like we have a cat, we adopted it, and I'm like proud about letting it free, and I've known the man, and like seems like the happiest cat ever.
Yeah, I bet.
But she's killing like mice, and she brings them to me as gifts, like all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned about it because
And what do we think about a mice versus a cat?
Well,
The average
there's
person?
like thousands of mice, of course, but I've had the feeling about it, like, do I kill my cat? Because I'm triggered by these. I don't even kill them, like I don't eat meat, because since I'm a little, I cry every time I see a dead animal, and this cat is bringing me down animal
One after the other after the other.
I'm like, what do I do?
He's really showing you what to do, isn't he?
Yeah.
But he's also showing you your feeling.
Yeah.
See, the first thing he's showing you is the feeling. The feeling is, my cat is more important than any other animal. That's the feeling. Why is your cat more important than any other animal is a question you've got to resolve emotionally from a sin perspective. Because it shouldn't be more important than any other animal.
So once we fix that emotion, like we fix the pet situation where it kills other animals, is that it? Should we kill our cat? Just get to the point.
You can imagine the next news report about that. He told everybody to kill their cat.
I was just saying at the break what a lovely open audience you are, and everything. This is going to be it, isn't it?
Now, firstly, can I point out, can you see automatically,
Yes, that's what I want to do.
Here we are in the physical issue, and automatically what's happening? We're willing to compromise these things for that issue. Can you see that straight away? We're willing to go, oh no, like what options do I have? And then we go, what? Are we really suggesting we're going to kill the cat, or what are we going to do now? Now I'm no longer in the physical issue anymore, am I? I'm in the spiritual and emotional, the higher parts of the hierarchy now is where I am. Trying to work out what is the loving thing to do, what is the best consistent thing, what is love even. See, even on this, most of you probably haven't realised that when you love one animal over the top of another, you are actually being unloving to both.
We're breaking a spiritual
You're
principle.
breaking spiritual principles, right? By having love for one over the top of another. You're breaking a spiritual principle. So now I'm having to come face to face with, oh gee whiz, it's sort of like, I've never even thought of this as a spiritual problem. Right? And I wanted to rescue the cat, right? Because of the compassion you felt you had. But is it real compassion? Or is it just that cat's circumstances reminded you about something in your own childhood, or what is it?
And this is where we get to the emotional component of the question, don't we? Why did
I need the cat in the first
rescue
place?
dog or the rescue cat pull on me, whereas the roadkill doesn't affect me?
I can drive along and hit a deer and pull it off the side of the road and keep driving.
Or snakes.
Whatever.
I don't go, oh, how about the snake? Sharks. Sharks are treated terribly on Earth.
terribly. Nobody is doing a rescue shark, are they?
A rescue dolphin, maybe?
It'd be hard.
Rescue shark, probably not.
Probably not. Nobody wants to rescue them.
Yeah.
So it's this cuddly, cute thing, and what does it give me? Gives me cuddles, and I get to feel like they've had a hard life, and it sort of resembles
Reminds
mine.
me of my own hard life.
Yeah. So this is where my emotions now. I'm in some sin, aren't I, emotionally?
Yeah. Can you see when it comes to receiving an answer from God on the subject of should you have one in the first place? Yes or no? And what do you do now you have one? Do I kill it, or what do I do? Yes or no? I don't even want to know that, because there's too much other investment happening inside of me emotionally to even consider it. And therefore, I'm not open to receiving even the truth about my cat. And if I'm not open to receiving the truth about my cat, how open am I going to be about receiving the truth about myself? That's an interesting question, isn't it? This is why most people, you share a truth with them about themselves, they get so angry, right? Because you share a truth with them about their cat, they're already angry. So by the time they get to themselves, it's like meltdown angry, like supernova volcano angry. Then, because we are in the state where we don't even want to consider the spiritual principle or the emotional principle as to why we had it in the first place, why we rescued it, what went on, and why is it that we never considered that a pet cat destroys so many other animals? Why is it that we never even thought about it? Right? They're good questions, aren't they? Because if I don't think about it, how is it going to change on Earth? Like now in Australia, I think they worked out that cats every year kill 20 billion.
There's a lot. There's a lot of cats.
Native creatures in Australia alone every year.
Because there's like, in some places on Earth, there's more cats than people. Domesticated cats. There's a lot of cats.
And if you consider that amount of destruction just for the sake of one type of animal, we're going to end up in the future at some point. We're going to end up with no lizards, no snakes, no birds, but we'll have cats. This is what's happening in Australia. This is the average cat in Australia kills 186, as I said, other animals every year. And this is not a hungry cat, because he gets fed already.
And they've studied it, because a lot of people put bells on their cats or they lock the cat inside at night. But they actually tracked some cats and found that they'd found ways to escape, that they could still kill animals even wearing the bell. Like, it's pretty damning in Australia what cats are doing, actually.
Yeah. But it's really because of humans. It's because we want to breed them. We want to continue them. We only see our pets, or you could say the domesticated animals, are more important to us than every other animal. So sheep, goats, cattle, cats, dogs, anything that's been domesticated, we see it as more important to us. In the case of sheep, cattle, goats, they are, for many people, their livelihood. Their entire way of living depends on them. Their entire money stream depends on them. They feel it as their survival depends upon them being able to farm these animals, right? Let alone when it's just a cat and a pet where your money doesn't depend upon it anymore. Right? You can see there's a terrible imbalance between the native environment and the domesticated environment.
And like, we haven't even talked about the emotional damage it does to you to have a pet.
So the spiritual damage it does to you, actually.
Can you talk about it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what do you guys think? What might be the emotional damage of having a pet? Sarah? Yeah?
I got my kids a pet because I wanted to make them happy because we moved
Yeah.
and Lucy was sick.
Right. So it's a way of helping the kids avoid unhappiness, yeah, which is unloving to their soul because they need to feel their unhappiness. Yeah.
And you can see the pet is really being used. Like, people are unhappy. You've got
Distract
to
them with a pet.
distract, divert, make happy. Yeah.
Yeah. What else? Please.
I think a big one is avoid loneliness.
Yeah. Massive.
Massive. Now, if you use an animal to avoid loneliness, you're not going to deal with your people issues. You are not. Your people issues are your biggest sins.
How are you going to have other relationships if you don't deal with your loneliness issues?
Yeah. So having an animal for the sake of removing loneliness, it's only an illusion, by the way, because the animal can't talk to you, they can't talk back, they can't boss you around, they can't listen
That's
to you.
why a lot of
They
people
can.
like them. Yeah.
Right? And this
They
is why,
just
yeah,
cuddle you.
that's right. So they just make me feel loved, but actually they can't love either. They're responding to your demand to be loved by just sitting in your lap. So it's an illusion that they're actually loving you. So how are you going to be with love in the future if you're going to live in an illusion constantly about it?
As long as a person does what I want, then they must love me. It's really the injury, isn't it?
Yeah. Any others? We come over.
So, Ellie?
I think a lot of times people get them to help their children learn responsibility. So caring, which us included.
Yeah, no, I
Taking
understand.
care of the dog.
Taking
feeding
care
the
of something
dog,
that's
walking
alive.
the dog, yeah.
Yeah, maybe a more pure motivation, isn't it?
Has anyone done that and their kids actually did the thing? Because I've met a lot of people who did it for that reason, and then
yet
they ended
the
up
mum and dad finish
caring
up
for
and
the-
looking after the mum and dad buy the food, the mum and dad. So for example, if you're going to teach your kid full responsibility of caring for something, they should buy the food. They should earn the money to buy the food for that animal. And if they're not doing that, then you're not teaching them responsibility. If you're buying the food for them and doing all the other work for them and grooming them and taking them to the vet and all the other work and they don't have to do any of that, then how much are they actually learning responsibility?
Can I ask one more
Sure.
question? And it maybe is a little bit off topic, and it's fine if you don't.
Yeah.
I'm just curious how animals without a soul absorb your emotions.
Yeah.
Do you want to go there?
Every single element that God created in the universe was created responding to love. Right down to the atomic structure of an atom, right the way through to a living creature. It all has been created to respond to love.
And as a result, it also responds to a lack of love.
Correct. You follow? So God created it that even the smallest particle that God created, which is far smaller than an atom, responds to love. It responds to the emotion of love. Now, it's probably fairly well known that this is true without people thinking about it very much. Because, they've done experiments, haven't they, with things like water, and if you love the water, how the water changes its shape when it forms into ice, and so forth. They've done these experiments that prove, really, that elements respond to love. But people don't think that applies to everything. They only think it applies to water. Right? But it applies to everything. Every element that God created responds to love. So when you love a thing properly, the thing will respond. Whether it's a physical thing, an element, a tree, a human, and an animal. And they don't need to have souls to respond. There's an instinctual response that God's created to respond to love. And the only creation of God that differs from that is the human, in the sense that it's not instinctual, in the sense that there's got to be some feeling involved, because of self-awareness and free will. But God created everything to respond to love. So absolutely every element, everything that you can think of, the sand that's under your feet, right away to the clouds in the sky, all respond to love one way or the other. Right?
And of course, animals have spirit bodies as well, so that makes them even more sensitive, if you like, because they have, like sand doesn't have a spirit form.
No.
So it does have an energetic form, though, doesn't it?
It does have a decaying energetic
Yeah.
form that enters the spirit world
Yeah.
through its decay,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have an energetic form in the sense of like a soul or a spirit body.
So beings with spirit bodies are very sensitive to the will of souls, if you like.
So, and the more higher in the hierarchy the creation is, the more it responds. So what that means is an animal which is quite high in the hierarchy of God's creations responds more than like the soil under your feet. But the soil under your feet responds less than a plant does, because the plant is higher in the hierarchy. So it gets back to this hierarchical principle with every application of law. So the thing that is the lowest responds in the least, you could say, the least actionable way, I suppose, because it's an inanimate object, right the way through to things that are animate, which are very complex beings. They respond in the most way. So when you love them, they feel that love, but they don't know it's love. They don't know it's love, but they respond to it. So a plant, when you love it, it doesn't know that it's love that it's responding to, but it's been designed to respond to it. So that's why it will do well if you love it. Yeah?
If you think you're loving it, but you're really just needy for it,
It'll die.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's also been experiments done along these lines, but again, not applied to everything in the universe, not applied to everything we do. Yeah. So go, Adrienne, and then straight behind.
I have a question about God.
Yep.
So we've created all this sin, and so, we can ask God, our pets a sin, and if our conscience is clear, we'll get a yes or no answer. But if we ask God, what do I do now about my dog? Do I kill him? Is God actually going to even answer that question because it's our creation?
No,
will He
God
tell
said,
us what to do with the creation of our own sin?
Well, He'll tell you the principles
He'll
involved.
tell you what's loving, if you want to know.
If you want to know.
Yeah, but God will never tell you what to do.
No, that's what I
Because to do that, He would be influencing your will.
Yeah.
But God wants you to know the truth about everything.
Yeah.
So if you ask the truth.
So, I'm not going to ask him, should I kill my dog?
And he's not gonna answer that.
answer that.
No.
But if I asked him, what's the loving principles to guide me?
Correct.
Then he will answer.
That's right.
That? Okay.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Just if you hand it back.
Straight back.
Using animals for mental health therapy, for people with mental health issues, for emotional therapy.
Not a good thing.
No, I know. That's
Yeah.
and also the
again, we could ask God, couldn't we?
with the, yeah.
But can I explain the logic of it? What's a mental health problem?
Emotional problem. Yeah.
So if you're using an animal to avoid an emotional problem, is that going to be good?
No.
No. For
No,
the soul
I
of the
know that
person.
from personal experience. Exactly.
That's right.
I just wanted to.
Yeah,
That's right.
You're just listing the things why we have.
Yeah, I'm just still listening. Yeah, because that one is personal for me.
That's right, yeah. So what we end up doing is, you see, there's all sorts of reasons why people say they have a pet. Right the way from just I want one, right the way through to it's essential for my life, kind of range. If we look at all of them, the majority of them are selfish and without any real love for the pet. Right? Or the pet's life, or its way, or the lives of other animals that we are putting lower than our pet. Right? We're not looking at it.
Why don't we talk about service animals then? Guide dogs and dogs that respond when someone's going to have a fit, or drug dogs, or what do you think?
What do you think God thinks?
Oh, no. Like using animals to correct our bad behaviors, it feels wrong to be at any level.
Are you sure? Like let's say one of the things humans need is fibres. We need fibres in order to create clothes. And some of the best fibres are wool. Wool is a fantastic fibre. It's got a lot of properties that are great for living long-term good. And to get wool, we have to have sheep. And if we have sheep, then somebody's got to farm the sheep. And then how do they farm the sheep? If there's just one person farming the sheep, he's going to need something else to help him farm the sheep. He's probably going to need a dog to round up the sheep at times when they need to be shorn and things like that, right? He's going to need those things, right? Now, can you see we're starting to love people? And we're starting to love the animal for what it's doing for people as well. The animals have a role now, not a role that we've defined for them because it's something that is already part of their nature, but we're not harming them specifically, depending on how we do that farming.
There is harm done.
There is harm done,
There,
but
currently on Earth there's
currently
harm.
there is, but it doesn't have to be. A lot of it's due to expedience and due to money and so forth, right? Not due to the fact that you could farm a sheep in a loving manner, couldn't you? You could choose to do that. Of course, not many people on Earth do, but you could. Now, if you did that, and the farmer, of course, a farmer who's producing an essential thing for people on Earth he shouldn't have to go and buy his tractor, and he shouldn't have to go and buy food, and he shouldn't have to go and buy anything, because he's producing things for the rest of us to live, right? He shouldn't have to worry about the money all the time. He shouldn't have to worry about the fuel, and he shouldn't have to worry about anything. If he's willing to do that, which is a loving thing to do for the rest of humanity, why aren't we all just gifting him whatever he needs to get that job done in an environmentally non-destructive manner that also is loving towards the sheep? Why aren't we gifting him those means? Now we're talking about something that may be loving. We can ask God about that, and you'll get a lot more clearer answers about what is loving and what isn't when you receive information about that.
I find this question really interesting because Juice and I don't eat animals or consume any animal products, and most people we know are vegans, but a lot of vegans that I've met are very concerned about how sheep and cattle and sheepdogs and these kind of animals that are typically domestic but used for consumption, if you like.
Yep.
Very concerned about that, but many of them have pets, and to me the addiction they have with the pets, when I feel God's feeling, they are far more in the spiritual and emotional realm of sin than some farmers. I know I've known a lot of farmers in my life. I grew up in the country. Some farmers have a very respectful relationship, say, with their dog, and don't use their dog for emotional and spiritual addictions. There's almost a contract between them. They both work hard, they work alongside each other. So there is still a question, is that loving or not? But I find it interesting that very often he's viewed as the abuser of animals, and the people at home with their cats that come and have to sit on them while they watch TV and, fill the gap in their marriage or whatever, that's not seen as abuse, that's seen as love. So this is where examining the spiritual and emotional aspects of our life, if we're very sincere, we go, oh, I'm using this animal to avoid an emotional problem, rather than I'm in a contract with this animal to get a physical job done.
We're going to work together to get a job done.
Yeah.
So it's much more loving to work together with an animal to get a job done than it is to use the animal for yourself.
In this hierarchy.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And one comment you made about the experiments that have been done with plants. It's called the intention experiment. It's really different.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you want to look at that.
Yeah. All right, so we've spent an hour on the pet. Can you see, though, how the physical issue automatically generated feelings in you of what do I do now, and how do I deal with this, and how do I solve this problem? How do I deal with this problem in a loving manner now that I've created it, is really the question. And God expects that you fix the effect of your own sin. So if the effect of your sin is now you have some animals, some pets, you're going to have to fix the effect of that. What are you going to do with that? How are you going to deal with that? That is something you're going to have to make some decisions about. And they're going to be hard decisions, because every decision that was made in sin is also going to be quite hard to make the decision to fix it. So they're going to be decisions like, you know, do I have to put down my pets? Do I have, you know, those kind of decisions? Given the fact that many of them would not exist if it wasn't for humans wanting them. If you look at the percentage of, say, cattle, which are only generally produced for meat production, used for meat production, versus the percentage of native animals, which are generally not used for meat production, and you look at the percentage and you look at how humans view them, there is a large discrepancy. This is why we have mass extinctions of other animals on Earth, because we are treating those other animals as if they are lesser to us. They mean less to us. They are not needed, so therefore we treat them as if they disappear, it does not matter to us. If we're honest, it doesn't matter. And this is the problem. It's an issue of what are we loving? When we love things, we're not going to love in preference, with the exception of humans being the highest of God's creation should be loved first, but all the animals should be loved next. These animals, and when it comes down to insects, we have terrible attitudes, and yet the insects are, you're living on them. Without them, you would die, right? And with cattle, you're not going to die not eating meat, but you are going to die if you get rid of the bees.
Or
right?
the flies.
Or the flies.
Disease that flies keep under
Correct.
wraps is quite
Right.
common.
So our attitude to these creatures is very much out of loving kilter. You know, we are heavily skewed towards the domesticated animal in preference to all these others, to our own detriment, actually. And also, of course, to the detriment of the environment as a result. Right? Now, that's the pets. We could say a lot more about it, right? But we don't want to be spending the next 3 days in Nova Scotia talking about pets. Right? But,
Do you? And can I just remind you of something that Jesus said at the start of this talk as well? For everything that we're going to raise as an example, remember there's a process of being aware to becoming awake to the sin.
Yeah.
And if you're sincere in that process, it's going to help you, it's going to help guide a lot of your decisions in regards to all these things.
yeah.
So
The discussion today is just about you becoming aware.
Yeah.
This is a problem. To become awake, you've got to get to the stage where you're willing to do something about the problem.
And properly awake, you'll do a good thing about the problem. Sometimes when we hear about a sin, we're like, oh, I can't do that anymore, I've just got to make a different decision, but we haven't fully felt it ourselves as a sin, and then we make another bad decision.
Yeah, yeah. And frequently, the second bad decision is out of guilt about the first decision, the first bad decision, instead of actually coming to terms with what is God's truth about the matter, what is the loving thing to do. Now, how does having a pet affect your relationship with God?
Good question.
It's a good question, isn't it? So remember we said here that the physical thing, quite often there's spiritual and emotional issues in it. So if you come back here, how does having a pet affect your relationship with God? Interesting question. That's the answer. Notice that. Just wait for the mic, and then we'll come across.
Perhaps instead of feeling the emotions that you're not feeling because you're using the pet for that, then you would go to God. Like often when I'm in my worst feelings, then I finally am like, God help me.
Yeah.
So it puts me into humility to then contact God.
Okay, so it can distract you from your relationship, from an emotional perspective. Yes, that's true. What else?
Sorry, this was very trigger because I work with dogs for a living, and
Yeah.
I felt, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt they brought me closer to God. I felt that they brought me closer to people.
Any animal can bring you closer to people, well, to God.
They're God's creation after all.
Yeah.
They're pretty wonderful. Animals are
And
wonderful.
they have life.
When you say they don't love, because I don't know, I guess I thought that, but I thought that I felt so much love, especially
Just hold the mic a bit closer.
and gratitude. I felt like I've received so much love and gratitude from animals that I've helped, that I've helped change their state of mind from fearful to happy to loving, and it's, to me, like, and now I'm thinking, like, do I have to give up what I do?
No, they're responding to your love.
So
Right.
because you've loved
You're
them-
thinking the animal is becoming more loving, but actually you are. And they respond to that.
and obviously they've come from an environment that's very unloving, and so they're still reflecting that, and then you're loving them.
And they're going to respond to that because of the response that is in all of their DNA to respond to love. Yeah. And many of the animals you're dealing with, if you understand, they've been treated badly, haven't they?
Yes.
And you're treating them better.
And I'm teaching the people how to treat them better. And basically what you said, like, I see all the time, like, and I have to tell people, like, you know, the animal's acting like this because of your emotion, because your fear is triggering the animal.
Correct.
But
So now, how can you bring what you do into more harmony with love? Because
I
you're
ask
just
myself that every day.
well, you're just doing it with domesticated animals.
I mean, I try to treat people the same way, but
Yeah. But can you see there's an imbalance between the domesticated animals and how you feel about them, and the animals that are just in nature and how you feel about them?
But I love them too. I always try to save injured birds, squirrels. 2 weeks ago I saw a skunk that was injured, and I called animal control. Like, I don't eat meat. Like, I feel I love both of them. Like, I don't allow the dogs that I'm with to kill other animals. Although I'm feeding them meat, so I guess that's kind of a contradiction.
How many horses and how many cattle had to die to feed your dog?
But wouldn't they eat anyway, though?
Yeah, but what would they normally eat? In the wild, what would they normally eat? They would find usually an injured animal or a dead animal, and they'd eat that. That's what they would do. Right? That's what they all do in the wild, isn't it? Yep. So we've got to be real careful here, you see, because you can still see that there is an imbalance. The key is, I'm not saying everything you're doing is wrong, because it isn't, right? But there is still an imbalance that has to be fixed. So that's something you can talk to God about and find out, well, how do I fix this imbalance? The fact is, these dogs that I'm keeping, which have all been brought to me from people who are disrespectful to them, on the whole, yep. What do I do with them if I keep all of them alive? Then also there's a lot of other animals that have got to die for me to keep all of them alive. This is the effect of the sin, you see. We humans don't consider the long-term ramifications of their sin. What they do is they go, I just want a pet, so they get a pet. And the next person goes, I want a pet too, so I'm going to get a pet. Oh, you got a dog and I got a cat, and, you know, let's all get a pet. Let's go and, I want a budgerigar and I want a cockatoo, and and everybody gets their pets for a purpose without considering the long-term consequences of breeding up all of these animals to the point where they are far in excess of what they would be naturally occurring. Because they've all been supported by humans to get to that place of being far in excess. Right? Now I'm going to have to face the fact that I've done it. I'm going to have to face the fact that I've participated in that. I'm going to have to face the fact at some point that these things are true, and then I'm going to have to do, well, what do I do about that? Right? Now, I'm prepared myself to sacrifice the life of an animal that has been created just for the point of human addiction, in order to save 186 other animals every year that haven't been created to feed human addiction. Right? So what we do at home is we have a cat trap to catch all the cats that have been released, because there's so many being released from, they started out domestic, and we catch them and we take them to the closest RSPCA in Australia, and they put them down. We pay for them to get put down humanely. Right? And the reason why we do that is we're saving all these other animals. And what triggered it for me was I went into my shed at home right? This was many years ago. I went to a shed at home, and lined up in a neat line were 9 tails of other animals that the cats in our environment had killed, and they'd lined up all the tails like a trophy along inside of our shed. And these were all little tiny possums in Australia called sugar gliders, which are becoming rare to extinct. And it had killed, just on our property, 9 of them. Right? And I'm going, here's something that humans have created. What am I going to do to fix it?
Wouldn't it be more loving to spay and neuter so they can't reproduce instead of having?
They're still going to do the damage. Their entire life they're going to kill these animals. So that might sound like a loving solution, but also I don't know how you would feel about all of your genitals being cut off, which is what neutering is, right? So I don't know. I think the animal would prefer living in the spirit world than having that. So I can see, like I've looked at all the, all the possibilities here, and I can only see one answer, which is I've got to fix the sin of the human by taking an action which I don't really want to take, but it needs to be taken for the sake of all the other animals. Right? And that I'm being the most loving making that decision. Now, that's my decision. Right? I'm asking you, what's yours? Now, can I just stop the whole discussion and go? Because can you see how little the issue is, in the sense of, we think this physical thing is such a hardly even thought of, right? And yet how big the issue is. Like it's issues relating to spiritual emotions that you're having, and also spiritual beliefs that we have are relating to it as well. Example of that, the spiritual belief that an animal loves you. It doesn't love you, it responds to love from you. That's a spiritual truth.
So it's good to love an animal.
It's good to love an animal.
It's responding, it's doing better because you love it.
Yeah.
But it's not love that you're going to receive from it.
When we went to our property where we are now, it was about 20 years ago now. 18 years ago. When I went there, there was hardly any grass because the goats had eaten a whole lot. There were hardly any young trees because the goats had eaten all of that. It was a goat farm. 40 acres. There were no birds aside from blackbirds, right, which is a breed of bird in Australia, and crows. Two species of birds. That was all there was. There was nothing for them to eat or to live in or to breed in, or nothing. Now, we did a lot of work environmentally to improve that. Now we have over 60 species of birds on the same property, right? And the animals are just like improving, even though our conditions are very harsh. The animal levels are improving as a result. Now, that's because we love them. And we're willing to do the work to improve their environment. Before Mary and I make a veggie garden, we haven't got a veggie garden yet. We're making a garden for the animals first. Because we're going to be in the future very dependent upon these animals. And also, if I love them, I'll care about them. The fact is most of them don't have enough food or anything to live in, no shelter. And as a result, we've got trees growing on the property when our neighbours have trees dying on theirs. We've got animals, more and more animals on our property than our neighbours have on theirs, more birds on our property than the neighbours have on theirs, and so forth, as a result of just loving them, providing an environment for them, right? But in the process of having to do that, we've had to consider what effect are all the domesticated animals having on this natural environment. It's absolutely devastating, is the answer to that question, right? Now, if I loved, I would know that. And if I loved, I would do something about that. I would change that. And I wouldn't use any emotional justification to stay unloving. Right? Now, the whole reason why I brought that up was an example. It wasn't even it wasn't what we want to discuss mostly. It's just an example of how people get so head up about staying in their sin and not dealing with its consequences. Right? You can see here, if I said at the beginning, relationship with God requires awareness of sin. Let's look at this. It requires awareness of sin. If I can't be aware about pets, how in the hell am I going to be aware of bigger things that are like big, strong emotional issues inside of me? How am I going to become aware of those, where I am the actual one that needs to change? Right? Not me physically change something else, but I have to make a change. How am I going to deal with that problem if I can't even become aware of a thing that's a physical thing in my environment and how I'm loving it or not? Can you see? Yeah. Remember how I treat the pet really is related to physical life. It's something I can see, I can relate to, I can see it and its existence. I can measure its existence. I can see whether I'm being loving or not. And yet I'm completely unwilling to even see it all because of different emotions that I have that cause me to be completely unwilling. So I'm sinning from God's perspective, like humans creating huge amounts of domestic animals on earth is a sin. The consequence of the sin is the destruction of the environment in a manner that's going to end up with mass extinctions, right? And this is what we're noticing when we travel around the world. We went to Austria. We managed on one day to have a bushwalk. We did 18 kilometres bushwalk through the Alps. Most of it had trees and plants and everything else, very damaged. We saw 2 birds the entire day. This is in the middle of the Alps in Austria.
In the height of summer.
In the height of summer. We saw 4 insects the entire time. And I was looking. There were 14 of us walking or something. And I was trying to point out to people, can you tell me when you see something? Yeah. This is in the middle of the Alps in Austria. All right? Now, I look at that and I go, how did we get to be so unloving to our environment? Where now, and we asked people locally and they said, look, 20 years ago it wasn't like that. Even 20 years ago. But now they're noticing a large devastation of birds and animals and insects and everything in their environment. What's happening? Like if I love, I want to know. And if I love, I want to do something about it. It starts with me doing something about it, doesn't it? Yeah. And so, we went to Portugal. Portugal, there's a lot of introduced species. And we can see the effect of the devastation of those introduced species on the natural environment. Right? Everyone was going down the beach, driving past the devastation to get to the beach, driving past the devastation to get home. Nobody was concerned about the devastation. Because everyone was there on a holiday. We were there in the middle of summer. Everyone's there on a holiday to get some sun. Right? No concern. How unloving have we become? And this is just to a physical thing, to our environment, which, by the way, is going to be necessary in the future for our survival and our children's survival. And yet we can treat it so badly that we don't even consider. And one way we're treating it badly is through domesticated animals. What we're doing with domesticated animals. So, that's the end of that subject. And last, hopefully you get the principle. Because the principle is more important here, isn't it? I have sinned, I'm going to have to destroy it. I'm going to have to destroy my own creations of sin. Anything that's a sinful creation, I am going to be responsible for the destruction of that sinful creation. Right? I am going to have to do something. Something that is not going to be pleasant and good, oftentimes, that I'm going to have to do. Not pleasant to me emotionally, I mean, but I'm going to have to do it because love requires it. And if I did love, it wouldn't even feel challenging to do, to be honest. Because you'd see the reason, you'd want to address the reason, deal with the cause. So the real cause of pets or domesticated animals on the planet is the emotions of humans. So what do Mary and I spend a lot of our time talking about? The emotions of humans, right? Can you see why? Because if the emotions of humans don't change towards a more loving aspect, our very environment is going to be, in many places around the world, is going to be unsurvivable in 50 years' time, right? If we don't deal with it. And we need to deal with it now, not 50 years' time when it's terrible. We need to see the writing on the wall, which many of you can see, right?
Yeah.
See the writing on the wall and then start taking some action. That's the loving thing to do. The very first action we can take is emotional and spiritual, changing our beliefs and changing our emotions so that we can feel from God what to do about this terrible, monstrous thing we're doing to the environment, which all of us are at some extent participating in. But we need to come to that conclusion. Yep. So that's an example of a physical one. Are we brave enough to go to the sexual one? The sexual example. There was only one physical thing. We could have chosen lots, couldn't we? Toilet paper, whatever.
Who thinks that toilet paper was mild compared to pets? I was here for toilet paper and pets. Pets is far more emotionally charged.
Yeah.
Good choice.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can see why the average human feels emotionally charged about it, because there's so many emotions tied into it, right? And that's why it's emotionally charged, whereas giving up toilet paper, well, let's have a bidet instead or whatever, and that's a lot easier to consider. But when it comes to, well, maybe not for some of you, I don't know. But trust me, water on your bottom is far better than paper on it. But, but for many of us, giving up the paper is relatively easy compared to giving up a pet. Mind you, how many of us even get to give up the paper? You know, like, do we make changes to our home? Do we make adjustments so that, you know, what we're doing is more economically friendly, environmentally friendly, and so forth? You know, these are all aspects really that are spiritual, and can you see they're really spiritual and emotional decisions, and not really physical. We think they're physical, so we just treat them with disdain almost, without thinking that actually, no, there's spiritual principles here that need to be examined, that we don't examine. Make sense? Just behind you.
Okay, so in terms of compensation from the soul,
Yep.
So the physical aspect of pets is owning a pet or having a pet.
Yep.
And then the emotional sin is the avoidance of our emotions or the avoidance of our childhood.
Yep.
In terms of the size of the compensation, can you talk about the difference?
Often it's pretty strong. There's many people in the spirit world who are in the hells because of their attitude to pets. And it's not because of anything other than what it created in them emotionally, and what emotions they then embraced as a result of their attitude to pets. And a lot of it was to do with their attitudes to pets being superior to their attitudes to people, where they treated people badly compared to their own pet. That makes sense? So there are very strong spiritual principles. If a person is in such a condition emotionally where you think a person is less important than a pet, you're going to be arriving in the spirit world in a poor condition.
Thank you.
It makes sense, doesn't it? What I just said? you can understand why. You know, if you're treating people worse than you treat an animal, then that tells you a lot about what you think about people. And from God's perspective, how does he think about people? They're the highest of his creation. That's how he feels about it. So you wouldn't be able to do that if you had any connection with God. Yeah? Yeah. So yes, these physical issues usually highlight some very deep spiritual and emotional problems. Yeah. Which is good, because then we can solve them, right? Without the sin being aware, without the sin being becoming aware of the sin, how do we get to a point where we're awakened to it? You know, if we just go along our merry way and pets generous, without considering those ramifications, then really we're not aware. And if we're not aware, we're never going to be aware of the emotions or other things involved with them. Now the tractor is started up again. Yeah. Can you see my point? Yep. That's good. Can you see how tricky it is emotionally? Pretty tricky with the sin, isn't it?
Yeah.
You see, many of your comments was the sin fighting for itself. Yep. And that's what it does. It sort of says, but I want to be here. I want to be here. Keep doing it. You know, we can bring these things into harmony with love, and it's going to require the effort of many, many people to do so, right? But it starts with a small group of people understanding the principle, because most people don't, right? Okay. Are we brave enough to attack the next one?
Yes.
Who's got a sexual one?
Well, maybe we should have a short break because it's 2:30. Should we do that first? Before we get into the hard one?